The Studi is a beauty that is different by design. Up front, you'll find...
So good to see all of you, see familiar faces. Thank you again to the Studebaker National Museum for having me today. I spoke here last year about some infrastructure projects and history on the north side of South Bend. Today I'm going to talk to you about Studebaker Housing, specifically the Citizens Home Company. And hopefully I'll be able to use, got to point it at the machine, thank you. So, brief introduction of myself. I'm Adam Twaring. I'm the Historic Preservation Administrator. I am joined by my colleague Ross Van Overberg, who is the Historic Preservation Specialist. We're staff to the Historic Preservation Commission of South Bend and St. Joseph County. We do a lot of advocacy work about historic property ownership. So here we are at one of our window workshops. We like to teach people about how to maintain and preserve their historic houses. We're also staff and to the commission where we do oversight and review of projects on designated properties. There's some 1,000 properties in South Bend and St. Joseph County that are under that legal jurisdiction. So that's our daily grind. What we do for the city is maintain records, review projects, advocate for historic properties, and I would say gently try and cajole other city departments and property owners to maintain their historic properties. I'm gonna be blunt with you guys. I like maps. My in-laws are in the crowd today, and they will confirm that I love maps. They have given me maps for my birthday. I'm very thankful for that. I'm gonna show you a lot of maps. Like, that is one of the places that we in our office live in. It is actually the germinus for this talk, was my wife and I, who like to go antique shopping. We're up in Niles, Michigan. We were in an antique store downtown Niles, and I was leafing through the maps and came upon this. This is a plat map for Studebaker Place, 5th edition here in South Bend. Don Moyer's on the south there, Woodside, Erskine in the center, High Street on the east side. And I saw this in the stack and was like, I'm acquiring this. It's like 20 bucks. It's one of those things where I was like, how can I not pick this up? It is here with us today. I had it framed recently by a shop in Elkhart. It's going to be hanging in our house here soon. This is I think the torment that my wife puts up with, that there are maps in virtually every room in our house. We have a hallway of maps upstairs. I really like maps, so you're going to see a few. Speaking of, I like to always start with sort of the older historical context for what we're going to be talking about. This is 1852. It's an early atlas map for the state of Indiana. And we've zoomed in here in the South Bend area. You can see South Bend sort of north central. Let me make sure I've got my laser pointer, I think. Yeah. South Bend here. We got the edge of the Kankakee Marsh coming in from the southwest. And we have the Michigan Road coming up from the south, and then getting to South Bend, and then cranking over towards Michigan City. And I wanted you guys to see this for a number of reasons, because we're going to be talking about this area here on the immediate south side of the city. And there's going to be reasons why we talk about that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But in 1852, there was about 1,600 people living here in South Bend. This is a zoom in, and I wanted you guys to see 1852, sort of the limits of the city at that point. On the south side, South Street and the what would eventually become Union Station and the railway depot, and eventually Studebaker's major factory complex, was sort of the southern edge of the city. And then on the north side, it really didn't go much further than what we would consider LaSalle. There was gridding there, but it was relatively industrial. There was a lumber yard and some other features there. Joe, it better be Ken.
Just a reminder, Deborah, please silence yourself.
Speaking of, here's 1863. Notice the population has increased in a very short period of time, about 10 years. We're at about 3,800 people. It's doubled. And again, the city limits, it's still relatively confined to, on the south side, the railway line, and it's starting to expand westward. One of the gems of history that I love pointing out to people, notice College Grove. It's essentially where Frank's Place is today. There was the Northern Indiana College that was briefly there for less than 10 years. which was a Methodist school. It is now, like, you can look at the foundations of a couple of the buildings there and see stone foundations, much older buildings than we realize. That leads to the wood tree names that we see in that area, walnut, things like that. But I wanted you again to see on the south side here, the area that we're going to be talking about today is this area here. And at this point, it's still very much farmland. One note that I'll point out here, G.W. Ewing and W.G. Ewing, these are brothers. They are the Indian agents, and they are working out of Fort Wayne. One brother lives in Fort Wayne, one brother lives in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to butcher this quote, but Abraham Lincoln once said that one of these brothers was the worst person that he had ever met. They were absolute horrible people as far as we can tell. I'm going to point out, notice this large tract of land that they own there. That is essentially Rum Village. I think that's very fascinating in that they are the Indian agents. How do you think they got this land? Another thing I'll point out here, Bowman's Creek is cutting through here. J.L. Bowman. There should be some names that you should recognize here that are either later on streets. But pay attention, we have Henry Studebaker has acquired some property here. So 1866, population again, 3,800 people. I love these maps. This is my previous talk I talked about. This is one of the first introductions I had to South Bend's history, was looking at these maps, which are now available at the Library of Congress. You can see them online. They're super detailed. They're a little stylistic. There's some alterations and whimsical, dreamlike things that never got realized. But I like these because they show you, whether we realize it or not, the way the city is expanding. So in 1866 here, we're looking west-southwest. So the city is expanding west from the downtown. Over here, and I'm looking at this sort of skewed, we have the railway depot. Just a few years later, 1874, notice now that we're looking to the south more. And what's happened there by that railway depot? Some guys have built a factory. That's the beginnings of the Studebaker factory. Andrew will be talking about this at the next talk, so please come to that. And notice that the expansion of the city is starting to push southward, down, Main Street here, Michigan Street here, Lafayette Street. It's starting to expand southward with more neighborhoods. This is Taylor's Field, which will eventually be developed in the next 20 years. But I wanted you to see sort of the way the city is expanding at different times. 1875, we can sort of see the limits of the city limits here before we get into the farmland areas. And down here, J.W. Ewing still owns one parcel, but some Studebaker family members are buying around him. Studebakers, Wangers, Studebakers. This will be important here in a little bit. And you start to see more of the industrial expansion eating into that farmland to the south. 1890, we're at 21,000 people. Notice now that the view is looking west again. And we have more residential development moving out towards College Grove that we mentioned earlier. We start to see some residential development on the northwest side, heading down Portage and Lincoln Way. 1895, this is from one of the plat maps. All of these different colors, these are different subdivisions. So when a property owner decides to subdivide his lot and make a residential development, they then name it. So Bowman's Place Edition, Oak Park Edition, Wanger's Third Edition. And so we're looking like we've shifted a little bit south from the rail line, which is at the top here in the factory complex. The Olivers own a large swath of land here to the west. Midway Street, anyone want to take a guess what Midway Street is? It's Indiana. That's Indiana today. We got Miami over here, Fellows, Michigan. So we see this creep. It's happening southward. On the eastern edges of that, you have factories. So South Bend Toy, this is Miller Knobloch Wagon Company, another one of the wagon works that was here in South Bend. There was also the Coquillard Wagon Works, which originally their factory was at the corner of Lafayette and essentially Lincoln Way, where there's the gas station now. There used to be a multi-story brick building, which was their wagon works at other locations in town as well. But seeing this creep southward and the addition of more railway lines that are connected in to the Grand Trunk. 1909, South Bend world famed. Many of you have probably seen these posters. There's some people that are reproducing them now. There's books that are titled this, South Bend world famed. This was a Chamber of Commerce PR campaign. They did a contest to see what the slogan would be. And at the time, this was from the newspaper article that announced this new slogan, which was released on May 1st, 1909. South Bend world famed. And the merchant on the left, coupled with the manufacturer, walking forward with this banner in front of the crowd of workers and excited people, and the billowing black smoke, sort of ominous, but sort of this coupling of civic pride, civic interest in promoting the community. And it was a very distinct PR effort. The South Bend world famed articles are meant to be, or books are meant to be, our advertising. And the Chamber of Commerce pilots that and advocates for that. So here is the book that they create later that year. A curious thing that I discovered when I was reading through this, Studebaker is not in this book. They're a major manufacturer at their time, and I haven't talked to Andy about it yet as to why that is, but it's sort of a curious thing. There's a number of manufacturers in it. These are available on the Michiana Memory website, which is a public library digital collection. I would highly recommend that you check it out. You can leaf through it and see all the images and people that are included in it. So in 1911, the population is now 53,000 people. And that expansion south, so like the railway line is here, we're south of the downtown Oliver factory property land here to the southwest. Future Studebaker factory complex here. But this march south of residential housing and developed land has happened. And we've gotten all the way to Indiana. Anybody know what street this is?
Calvert.
I think that is Calvert. You are correct. So we got Henry Studebaker has donated land to make a park here. We're going to end up, I think this is Ewing, if I'm not mistaken.
No. Keep on going.
Keep on, it's the bottom edge, excuse me. This is audience participation, which is encouraged. Bowman's Creek is still snaking through the neighborhood. And notice, again, the manufacturing up here. 1912, George Kessler's plan for the city of South Bend. Again, population 53,000 people. And you can see the southern edge of the city. And you can see the confined locales. We started to march eastward. We're not going to talk about that today, but the River Park neighborhood, there's actually a competition between Mishawaka and the city of South Bend as to who would get River Park. And ultimately, South Bend is who annexed it. So this brings us to one of the first, I would say, exemplars or important people in our conversation. Albert Russell Erskine comes to the city. He's a vice president. He's the treasurer in the 19-teens. And he's going to be very important to our conversation regarding housing in South Bend. He purchases a house on West Washington, a house that many of you have probably driven by, one of the Studebaker residents, the brick house on the north side of West Washington. That's where he and his wife live and renovate before they move on to another residence that we will talk about a little bit later as well. The other gentleman, and this is the person that I've really enjoyed learning about, is Dr. Charles Augustus Lippincott. He is a Presbyterian minister. He comes to South Bend, and I'm going to try and read this with the skewed. Reverend Dr. Lippincott will take his theme, The Citizen and His City. The pastor who recently moved to South Bend has for years been active in commercial organization work in Flint, Michigan, his former home. He was in Michigan, he was in Chicago briefly before coming to the city of South Bend. He immediately becomes hyper involved in all facets of South Bend's community. It is incredible how many times he comes up in newspaper articles. Who's hosting the talk? Chamber of Commerce. Where is it being held? The Oliver Hotel. October 23rd, 1915. At one evening meeting to be held on November 12th, Reverend C.A. Lippincott will take on "A City is No Better Than Its Homes." The next afternoon meeting will be held on November 26th. And this was actually in a notice regarding women's suffragette. Again, he's all over the place. I didn't include all these articles. Immediately, he's involved with school corporation matters regarding the superintendent. There's some, a superintendent is dismissed and some people are replacing him, and he is one of the committee members that is speaking publicly against this dismissal and how it was an outrage and had besmirched the reputation of the previous superintendent. He becomes, I'm getting ahead of myself a little later, he's on the board of the chamber, he becomes very active in the Masonic community, he becomes the president of the hospital association. He is everywhere in a very short period of time. A.R. Erskine to have a country home. So this, I apologize that I didn't include the date here. 475 acres, but I believe this is 1915 or 16. It's earlier in the teens. So again, that creep south and southeastward, Erskine buys up a whole bunch of property to the east of Miami. And that article goes on to say that he is not buying property on Ewing. There's this very strange, there's concern or thoughts that there's some sort of other deal going on, that he's going to be buying property on Ewing, and he does not. Which brings me to one of the interesting things that's happening in the 19-teens. Nationwide, there's talks about housing. Proper housing, held necessary, should be part of city planning, says J.E. Lathrop, a New York expert. Mr. Lathrop comes to the city of South Bend. He is part of the planning commission in New York City, which has recently adopted its planning organization at that time. Full disclosure, I am part of the larger planning team. So in my previous talk, I joked you're going to be hearing a lot of infrastructure talk and some planning talk. I was sharing this with my colleagues this morning, that this is sort of a neat thing, that at this time, in 1916, the state of Indiana didn't have legislation regarding planning or essentially zoning, how land is supposed to be used. He comes to the city and talks about the importance of this and how it should be influential in the adoption of this legislation later that happens in the next couple of years. Appears a strong advocate of good housing, pointing to the need of a proper housing law or building code in cities applicable to residents as well as business districts and to single houses as well as tenements. There's another paragraph where he's being very sort of negative, and again, he's coming from New York City regarding sort of urban tenement housing and the vice and the problems that they're experiencing with that. But this next paragraph, citizens of a municipality are as one big family and should teach each other as such. I've wondered if this is supposed to be treat, but who knows with the newspaper. We have a moral and legal right to require that our neighbors live decently with a cheerful surrounding as possible, and at least within the ordinary requires of sanitation and health. February 10th, 1919. The library announces that they will be having materials specifically devoted to housing available for public consumption. That's how pervasive this conversation about the need for housing and the importance of housing has become by this point. South Bend particularly interested in the subject, ready with information. And then the titles of the books and materials that are available: Proceedings of the First National Conference of Housing Problems in America, contains articles on the problem of the small house, city planning, and housing and best types of the small house. Articles included Ways and Means of Providing Working Men's Houses, by P.R. McNeil, Houses for Wage Earners with Illustrations and Plans, and Housing the Workers, an unfinished, pardon the misprint there, an unfinished job by George Cove. The community, the Chamber of Commerce, and the business leaders were acknowledging that they needed more housing and they needed better housing. Chamber will hold special luncheon. W.G. Grable to deliver the principal address. Housing problem to receive attention, at Monday meeting. Contractors and builders invited to attend. Then he talks about how they doubled the member or tripled the membership of the Chamber of Commerce, which is a super active organization at this time. We must get down to brass tacks on the housing proposition and push it through to a successful termination. Many more former members of the Chamber have been reinstated during the campaign because they saw the need of a united effort in this great emergency. They were broad-minded enough and loyal to the best interests of South Bend to see that cooperation is the one solution to all questions touching the civic life of a community. Concurrently at that time, the Studebaker Company has entered the fray. November 19th, 1919. Name housing architect. The Studebaker Corporations Housing Committee, at this point just a housing committee, has named N. Roy Chamblot housing architect for the building project. With Fred L. Dennis, Chamblot will leave next week for cities in Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario, where they will study the housing situations. Chamblot, on his return to South Bend, will have an office in the Studebaker Administration Building. It was so critical to Studebaker at this point to tackle the housing issue that they created a housing committee. Fred L. Dennis is a banker, and unfortunately he's been someone who's somewhat eluded me. I found one photo, and I unfortunately didn't include it here. He is now, at this point, employed by Studebaker in what will become the Citizens Home Company, which will be building housing for Studebaker employees. But another person has taken employ with Studebaker as well. F.L. Dennis, Dr. C.A. Lippincott, and N. Roy Chamblot of the Studebaker Corporations housing organization, this city, and W.C. Rod of the company's office in Detroit have returned from a visit to 15 cities. Erskine hires the Reverend to take over Studebaker's cooperative element, which is the element that deals with labor issues in the 19-teens and 1920s. Another quote that I'm remiss for not including, Erskine is interviewed by like a periodical for the automotive industry and says the greatest thing that he ever did was hire Lippincott. That's how powerful and influential, and as you'll come to see, I hope to see, how wonderful of a person he was. I should also mention, and Andy can talk more about this, 1913 is when the Studebaker strike happens in Detroit. So labor relations continue to be an interesting issue during the 19-teens, and Lippincott is the front line for the Studebaker business at that time. Later in 1919, in December, there's talk about them building a school and donating the land for the school and to erect apartments. I was having a discussion earlier today with one of the city planners. It says apartments, and it talks about decided to erect in South Bend 10 structures in the nature of boarding houses, which, if future necessity demands, can be rearranged for residence purposes. I don't know where these houses are or structures are, whether they were apartments or boarding houses, or whether they were houses that could be then redeveloped into houses, like as in rental houses that they would later turn into housing. We don't know. I would love to find that. George? Oh, I should say I need to thank George and Andy have been very helpful with my research on this, and George would slip me documents. Oh, I scanned this, so thank you. George, who used to volunteer with HBC and now volunteers here at the Studebaker National Museum. February 20th, 1920. Hold 12th annual dinner. Studebaker employees promise aid in making South Bend better. Again, this commitment of civic pride and the the importance of the company investing in the community. Who is one of the primary speakers? Lippincott, as well as Dennis. And I'm having trouble reading over there. Lippincott talks about how they're going to raise, I believe, a band and I think a performance group. And then Dennis goes in and starts talking about the housing initiatives. And I zoom in on this. I think there's a paragraph down here that's also, they've acquired 88 acres, have been purchased in Ewing Avenue, and 143 acres in Rum Village, which is now being plotted. The Rum Village addition will be laid out in the park style. The house is to be built in harmony, and the landscape, French villa and Spanish mission styles will be featured. Will sell cheap. Not $1 above the cost of the houses will be taken from the employees in purchase price, he stated, while the company, by reason of the fact that it is building in quantity production, can readily sell under the market building price prevailing. I should preface, it's Studebaker construction firms, it's Studebaker development firms, I believe it is Studebaker banking. Like, it is all of those facets creating these developments. The portion on Ewing, I believe, they redevelop a portion of another platted neighborhood and build houses on the north side of Ewing. I'll show that in a little bit. Word gets around. March 17th, 1920, Press of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Studebaker building city of beautiful homes for workmen. And the advertisements start showing up in the newspaper. Citizens Home Company starts putting in nigh on full-page advertisements in the South Bend Tribune and the South Bend News-Times. Figures don't lie. The figures on the above illustration were taken from the city engineer's records and prove that Studebaker Place is the ideal home location in South Bend. In altitude is higher than that of any other residence district in the city and is far enough removed to escape its dirt, smoke, and commotion. A golf course adjoins the addition and brings wonderful recreation advantages to your very door. I apologize. Nearby are 2 streetcar lines, and a regular Studebaker Place bus service now operates from town to your home. Study this drawing and you cannot help but realize that with its altitude, its other decided advantages, and easy terms on which these homes are sold, Studebaker Place offers you an exceptional opportunity to own your own home. They even provide a courtesy car. If we zoom in on the image that was at the top, this is looking west over the city. It is very stylized. When I gave this presentation in a brief form to some of my colleagues this morning, city planner Mike DeVita was like, what's going on here? Because this was not necessarily the configuration that was here, leading to the bridge by the farmer's market. But we're looking west. This is Jefferson here, downtown with its factory smokestacks. I think they played that up a little bit. I believe it was there, but they are trying to show you, if you move south and move up the hill, you'll be out of this. And it shows it very precipitously high in the distance. Notice that they say within city limits. I mean, the Erskine estate is going to be over here and is considerably higher. But we won't go into that. It wasn't annexed. And they talk about the altitude in feet above the river. Desirable, accessible, renting doesn't pay. The Citizens Home Company, and this is October 23rd, 1921. And I zoomed in on this map down below, which shows us the bus route, car line going down Michigan, school, golf course, the route that the bus takes through the neighborhood, and another school site. I think I have something to talk about with this school site. There was if you're in Leaper Park, there's a fountain, not the big Studebaker fountain, but before that fountain, there's a little horse trough. And there was a school on the south side of town. There were 2 of those horse troughs installed. One is currently at Potawatomi Park behind the greenhouse, just laying on its side sort of unceremoniously. I would like to reinstall that at some point. And the other is in Leaper Park, but one sat in front of the school on the south side and one sat in front of the courthouse. South Bend, world famed, 1922. Studebaker is in this one. Own this home, 1201 East Donald Street. I could have this entire presentation be then and now photos. I'm not going to subject you to that. I have a handful that I'm going to show you. This house is still standing. It has been modified a little bit. They've redone the front porch, but it is still there. Ross was going around driving. These pictures are from yesterday, and he messaged me. He's like, I can't take a photo right now. There's somebody on the front porch. So, thank you. He pulled back around and was able to get the photo. Price, $4,300. Down payment, $215. Monthly payment, $3,250. Phone, 3065, yep, and write the Citizens Home Company for particulars. Invest your rent money in a home. May 7th, 1922. So this is Ewing and Erskine. So those brick walls are still there. And this is where Erskine starts to then curve around. We're looking south at this point. So just for comparison, this roof line was what really cued us off on it. It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt that they have the address at the top, but this one was a little more enigmatic. Unique roof lines. This is the stuff that Ross and I geek out on regularly, just looking at old buildings and trying to figure out how they've evolved. Still standing. And curiously enough, this is the same house plan. And they are catty-corner from each other on Erskine. This one's just been modified. They've enclosed this porch. Both cases, the steps, again, these images are oftentimes stylized. The steps have either been shifted or were never built in the way that it was shown in this image. I do wonder if this is that tree. Are you walking in circles? There is nothing more active than a hobby horse on a merry-go-round, but he never gets anywhere because he doesn't know where he's going. Anyone interested in getting ahead realizes that he must give himself something definite to work for and never stop working till he gets it. Studebaker Place is a community entirely made up of opportunities really worth your effort. It offers you a new modern home, exceptionally well built. They are ready for occupancy now. The location is unexcelled in South Bend. Rent money after a small down payment will buy any of these homes. Curiously enough, May 26, 1922, Citizens Home Company liquidates a bunch of their tools. I just included that. They don't stop building. They're still building after this, but for whatever reason, they liquidate all these excess tools. Studebaker Place, an exclusive residence section of beauty, is community center, dwellers say. I didn't include it here, but it goes on to interview a number of the people that are living in the area, mothers, and it's like a mother-in-law in one case, and the wives that are at home, and they're talking about how beautiful the neighborhood is, how everybody takes care of their properties. This is in June of 1922. 140 homes in Studebaker Place, all disposed of. We wouldn't say that today, but they have all been sold. So at the same time, 1923, population 70,000. Again, indicating how explosive that growth was. And it's been, in large part, there's a good deal of it heading south along Michigan, Fellows, and to an extent Miami. This is Studebaker Place First Edition. This is Studebaker Place Second Edition. And third and fourth, if I'm not mistaken. South Side favored. Many elaborate homes to be erected in section. Many more elaborate homes of the South Bend residents will be in the future built on the South Side, says A.B. Thielens of the Citizen Home Company yesterday in discussing building expansion that is everywhere evident in this section of the city. That is really the logical section of expansion and development of a fine residential district for the future, he continued. That the city realizes the marked tendency for growth of the south side is evidenced by the selection of a location for a new junior high school at the southeast corner of the present golf links in Studebaker Park.
Riley.
It will become Riley, but it's not there. Which again, I think talks about sort of the, like, I won't say ephemeral, but like things are happening but not happening. Rapid progress is being made in development of Studebaker Place. Work of building homes in the finest edition and south section of the city is being done very speedily. Whitcomb and Keller becomes more and more involved, and like these advertisements, I don't know for certain if they were contracted to then handle the sale of the properties, but their advertisements these are full-page advertisements. Own your home in Studebaker Place. Talks about how rapid it is. I've also wondered if they're just cashing in on the name, because there's all these private development that seem to be happening on either side of it. In 1924, I love this, someone asked me if I wanted a copy of this on the phone one day, and I said yes. This is the major streets present and proposed for South Bend, Indiana, published in 1924. A copy of this is available on Michiana Memory. I love this. Inside, there's all sorts of data and graphs and images and maps, proposals for intersections that need to be revitalized and revisited. When I gave my presentation last year, there were some images that I pulled from this book talking about that bottleneck area on the north side. But it's talking about the progression of population in South Bend. This is 1920 at the time of the publication, 70,000. And they're projecting 140,000 by 1950 is what they're saying. Not terribly off. This is one of the maps in this streets report. And I point this out to show you the density of people living. So the darkness of those blocks is how many people are living in a particular area. And the south side development is still happening. It's still fresh. There isn't a lot of dots in these blocks. But north of that, pretty solid. West side over here, solid. Which again, sort of, the historian in me loves to look at that, because I say this with no derision towards the west side that we are now in, but sort of collapsed in on itself at this point around the Linden Avenue node, when in reality it was some of the densest populated areas in our city. And we see the expansion into River Park and then expansion north towards Notre Dame, as well as northwest towards eventually where Marquette School will be. So this is 1929, again, population 104,000. And we do see Studebaker 3rd, Studebaker 4th, Studebaker Place, and that's Studebaker 2nd. And these other developments, Chaz Weidler on the west, or east side, pardon me, and then development heading south down Michigan. Great question. So at this point, it's literally just creeping just south of this. So it is, I don't know if it's this line at this point, but it is very close to this. We've shifted west and northwest of us. We're on Ewing here. Rum Village is here. This is the other Citizens Home Company replat that I was talking about earlier, where they replatted some land of this D.M. Shively's edition, and they built, I believe they built these houses here on the north side of Ewing as you head west from essentially Lafayette. I believe Kaiser Park, the baseball park, is here, which we'll get to in a minute. February 5th, 1929. Dr. Lippincott reveals expansion in talk before chamber. Again, he's at the Chamber of Commerce. Traces growth since 1911, reiterates that major part of work will be concentrated in South Bend. He talks about the number of people that are employed at that time, 15,000, what their payroll is, and what they expect the payroll to be. Lippincott's super influential in getting sports teams for Studebaker. He's involved in a number of things, and this is February of 1929. This is March 15th, 1929. This, I won't say is the largest headline I've ever seen in the South Bend Tribune, but it's one of the largest I've seen. Dr. C.A. Lippincott is dead. Brief illness of pneumonia proves fatal. Prominent citizen had been in good health until this week. Official at Studebaker, active as businessman, Freemason, clubman, religious leader. The article continues and continues. I don't want to sound dramatic. I am absolutely fascinated with this man because, as far as I can tell, universally liked. And I won't say find me someone who didn't like him. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But just absolutely incredible, influential person is everything that I'm seeing. So this is the day of the announcement. There are articles where there are meetings that are happening and they receive notification that he has died. And they immediately make a resolution to send condolences. And that's then talked about in the newspaper as noteworthy of being needed to be discussed. J.D. Oliver, Senior President of the Oliver Chilled Plow Works. The death of Dr. Lippincott is the most shocking thing that has occurred here. I feel that South Bend has lost a citizen whom it will be very hard to replace. He was a man of rare ability, and the city has sustained a serious loss in his death. I lack words in which to express my personal regrets. I should say, all of these are these messages. Thomas A. Hines, president of the New Jersey, Indiana, and Illinois Railroad, head of the South Bend Rotary Club. I lack sufficient number of adjectives with which to reveal my sentiments of Dr. Lippincott. He was loved by all for what he was, by Catholic, Protestant, and Jew. There was the love for a wonderful man, a man who embodied all the principles of good citizenship and good fellowship. I knew him from every angle. He was broad-minded and clear-thinking. South Bend has sustained its greatest loss. Rabbi William M. Stern of Temple Bethel. I admired Dr. Lippincott a great deal for his civic spirit and for his broad-mindedness and kindly attitude toward everyone, and I believe the city has lost a very fine man whom it will be difficult to replace. 3 days later, there's more, and I apologize for including this because I have a sense of humor. Woman held in orgy killing. We will just get past that. Business suspended as Lippincott rights are held. Local schools also pause for 5 minutes. This is for those of you who play around in old newspapers, Ross and I love to joke that the newspapers are social media of the early 20th century and the late 19th century, in that there's social goings on, like so-and-so is going to Detroit to visit family, and that's posted in the newspaper, which is amazing. And then we talk about sensationalism in the news press today, but like, that's a sensational news article. City pauses for Lippincott's last rites. Active pallbearers at the funeral this morning were Harold Vance, Paul G. Hoffman, Christian Pretz, George M. Whitwer. Andy will be able to weigh in on the Whitwer family. A.L. Hubbard and Donald McGregor. Honorary pallbearers were A.R. Erskine, J.D. Eldridge, Jacob Wolverton, A.B. Thielens, Father Kavanaugh, Frank E. Herring, a member of Herring House, I believe that's the same gentleman, John C. Ellsworth, C.L. Bacchus, Harvey Dalton, H.V. Kimball, Carl Hibbard, Colonel C.A. Carlisle, A.H. Cushing, Rome C. Stevenson, George A. Robertson, Elisha M. Hartman, Frank M. Hatch, and Taylor. A number of these names, at least, are recognizable from street names. And it goes on.
How old was he?
You put me on the spot right now. He was born in, I could go back to the...
62.
Thank you, sir. This is born in the 60s, so yeah. I feel like I skipped over one here. I think the one I'm missing is that they renamed a park, Lippincott Park. That park is now Kaiser Park, where the baseball stadium is on Ewing. So I apologize for leaving that out. Depression. Studebaker Corp in receivership. One of the companies that is listed in the factories, or pardon me, the other subsidiaries of the company is the Citizens Home Company. But construction continues. By 1940, they're still advertising the development of housing. But things start to drop off pretty quickly. One of the last news articles that I can find referencing this company is this. C.A. Perkins, president of the Citizens Home Company, 1013 South Michigan Street, and former member of the Indiana Senate, is talking about the future of the city following the end of World War II in January of 1944. There's another year and months to go before the war will be over. And he's talking about the importance of housing and the importance of new construction and investment in the existing infrastructure in the path forward. Which is where it gets really sort of interesting. And I will admit that I haven't really talked to Andy about where this gets buttoned up, whether it continues and sustained until the dissolution of the company. I don't know. There's no more reference. After 1944, this news article, the closest that you'll get to it is when you see reference to the plats that they have made, and the company is listed there. Probably coming in somewhat under time right now, but summary, I like maps. I will always bring you maps. I think the value of civic pride, like this early 20th century movement by the Chamber of Commerce and business leaders in the city to turn around and invest in the city itself, and how integral that was to their business's success. They needed to attract people to move here. People could go work in another city. They could go work for another company. So what would bring someone here? And more specifically, South Bend expanded to the south in the early 20th century. We don't really think about that today when we're sitting here thinking about our city and its city limits and like the airport and the south side. But the ways in which it sort of ebbed and flowed in different direction, I find really fascinating because I'm a dork who gets paid to do that all day long. And I hope that you guys find it interesting. And finally, the importance of private investment. Like, this was a company saying that the best thing that they can do for their employees was to create an effective, cost-effective, inexpensive housing option for their employees. And they did it. Like, today we wrestle with similar housing crises, and the city is oftentimes looked to like, well, what is the city doing for it? And I'm not throwing stones at companies, that's not the intent, but how at that time in the early 20th century, the leadership in these companies valued housing as a way of attracting and keeping their employees. And I hope that we can get back to that. Questions?
Studebaker is different by design.